Hello everyone! Court is now in session for another episode of Innocent Until Proven Guilty. Last week I kicked off my month-long Wisdom Tree Bible Games event by putting Bible Buffet under the microscope. Today on the bill is an IUPG first, a double header, 2 games for the price of 1. Exodus, Journey to the Promised Land, and Joshua, the Battle of Jericho. Exodus Journey to the Promised Land was released in 1991 and is one of the earliest titles released under the Wisdom Tree imprint. For those who aren't aware, Wisdom Tree was a subsidiary of Color Dreams, one of the largest publishers of unlicensed titles on the NES. They developed the idea for Wisdom Tree as a way to capitalize on the lack of Bible-based games on the marketplace. They saw this as a means to make up for the loss of profits they were facing after Nintendo put pressure on retailers against stocking releases from companies like Color Dreams. As a way to cut down on costs, a number of the Wisdom Tree titles were basically just reskins, and Exodus is no exception. Exodus's Color Dreams predecessor was Crystal Mines, a futuristic maze-type game where you control a robot whose purpose is to search for crystals in a variety of mines. Yup, the title says it all. Since Exodus is a reskin of Crystal Mines, it uses the same exact design style. In Exodus, you play as Moses, and the main goal is to collect a certain number of M or mana icons, as well as 5 Bible questions indicated self-explanatorily by a question mark. As you can see, the basic concept is very simple, but just like with classic G1 Transformers, there's much more than meets the eye. As for the story of Exodus, the cartridge itself merely states that God chose Moses to lead the Israelites to freedom, but I've read a transcription of the manual on Nintendo Age, and it fills in more of the backstory. I'm not going to go into it fully, because it's a bit lengthy, but I will say that it looks like it sticks to the story as told in the Bible, so at least this has a tangible connection to the good book, unlike Bible Buffet. The brief story blurb is located in the Help section, which is accessed by pressing Select. This provides a ton of information about every facet of the game, which again I'm not going to go into fully, but reading it certainly makes the playing experience much more interesting. For example, by jumping into the game without reading this section, someone without biblical knowledge could surmise that the hero must be some kind of wizard who shoots out W's from his staff and destroys a bunch of rocks and other obstacles to get access to white M jars, which judging by the shape of the jar could possibly stand for milk. By scanning the Help section, we see that those W's are actually the Word of God, and that the rocks are actually obstacles to faith, and the obstacles are in fact murmurings of Israel and doubting God. Regardless of whether it makes sense or not, I'll give Wisdom Tree props for staying faithful to the biblical theme. Each level in Exodus involves Moses spreading the Word of God in order to collect the omers of mana and Bible questions scattered around each stage. In the earlier levels, this task is very straightforward and easy to accomplish. Everything is either overt in the open or just hiding behind the aforementioned murmurings of Israel or obstacles to faith. As a result, the first few levels can be breezed through pretty quickly. Once the minimum mana and Bible questions are collected, a light will flash indicating that the exit square has opened. The location of the exit varies from stage to stage. Sometimes it's just around the corner, but other times it'll be on the other side of the screen. This can be a bit annoying, especially with the timer ticking down, and it literally becomes a race to beat the clock. After each level is completed, the player has to answer the 5 Bible questions that were collected in the stage. More questions in a Bible game. Yay! However, unlike Bible Buffet, the answers and questions are presented clearly on screen, so at least we can see what we're being asked. However, if you're like me and not very versed in the Bible, then you're going to be still taking random guesses much like with Bible Buffet. Reading some of these questions reminded me of Creeping Death by Metallica, and that actually helped me to get some of them right. Score 1 for metalheads all around the globe! At the end of each string of questions, the correct answers are tallied up and rewards are given depending on the success of the performance. The player that aces the questions will receive a number of extra Bibles as well as extra lives. Regardless of how many of the answers are correct, a new drawing is unlocked that depicts events from the Book of Exodus. That's pretty neat, I guess. After that, it's on to the next stage to start looking for mana and Bible questions again. As the levels progress, the basic formula never changes, but additional factors get added to the mix that really start to increase the difficulty quickly. For example, the Pharaoh's magicians are the primary foe encountered in the earlier stages, but the rest of the Pharaoh's men enter the picture by level 9. The Pharaoh's magicians are very easy to take out, taking no more than 3 words of God. However, the Word of God has no effect on the Pharaoh's soldiers, who can only be eliminated by being crushed under the obstacles or bricks of labor. The rest of the enemies are quite tricky as well, but Moses has a secret weapon up his sleeve to deal with them: his staff. Or should I say staffs, since they explode soon after being dropped. Similar to Bible Buffet, the staff is perfect for vanquishing the more powerful foes, as well as clearing out obstructions in Moses' path. The bomb-like staffs take a little while to detonate, but here's a little tip. The time that the staff goes off can actually be controlled by the player. Just drop a staff, move back a few feet, speak the word of God in its direction, and BAM! Explosion City! The staffs definitely help in keeping the Pharaoh's men from stopping Moses' journey, but it doesn't make Exodus easy by any means. Far from it. This is tough with a capital T. The early portion starts off very straightforward, but the subsequent levels become more and more puzzle-like as time goes on. Whereas the mana is lined up all neat and in a row at the beginning, later stages place them in between mounds of bricks, obstacles, and weaknesses of man. The weaknesses of man in particular can be very tricky, since if they're freed way too soon, they'll crush all the mana located beneath it. Fortunately, the developers took this possible scenario into consideration, and each stage has an excessive mana if such an event happens. However, getting to the mana can still be really hard. If you get too careless in blasting the foundation, one of the weaknesses or obstacles can fall down and kill Moses. Weaknesses of man, huh? More like weaknesses of Moses, am I right? Anyone? Bueller? Even worse than that, sooner or later, the player will run into an unwinnable situation. If this happens, one of 2 options can be taken. One is to just wait for the timer to tick down, as doing so will count as a life lost and the level will start over from the beginning. The second option, and I feel almost dirty saying this, is to commit virtual suicide. I'm not joking. Pressing start and select together will make Moses explode as if he was standing too close to one of his staffs. A suicide feature in a Bible game. I understand why it's there, but I just have 3 simple letters to say in response to that. Wisdom Tree? WTF! Bad taste aside, there are limited lives and continues in Exodus, which wouldn't be a problem normally, except that there are 100 levels contained in this card. That's right, 100 levels. And let me tell you, I put in my time with this game. I tried as hard as I could for over 2 days in an attempt to beat it, and how far did I get? Level 17. Yeah, this game is tough. If I wanted to get anywhere near the end, I'd have to set aside a whole week or more just for gameplay, and I just don't want to do that. However, I will say that I had fun when I was trying to beat Exodus, something that was sorely lacking with Bible Buffet. Now, before I get to the verdict, let's briefly address the sequel to Exodus, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. Joshua was released a year after Exodus in 1992. Joshua continues the biblical narrative from Exodus, with Moses now being deceased and Joshua taking over the duties of fulfilling God's promises to the Israelites. Other than the changes in story, the playstyle is pretty much exactly the same as Exodus. Joshua has to collect 5 Bible questions as well as a quota of a certain item, in this case iron, brass, gold, and silver. The enemies, objects, and obstacles may look different and have new names, but they function exactly the same as those in Exodus. For example, instead of murmurings of Israel and doubting God, there are Israelite discontent and Achan sin. Instead of the golden calf of sin, there's the foreign idols, etc., etc. The same even applies to Joshua's weapons. Instead of the word of God, Joshua uses his trumpet to blast enemies to dust, and instead of a staff, he drops a ram's horn. Again though, the only change is in the name. Their purpose is exactly the same as the weapons in Exodus. Also like Exodus, 5 questions are asked after each stage, and the only real differences are that there are no drawings rewarded, and there are tones that play when a question is answered. There are, however, some differences when it comes to the power-ups. Exodus contains some extra power-ups, such as the Authority of God, which increases the range of the Word of God, and the Armor of God, which made Moses temporarily invulnerable to bomb blasts. But Joshua cranked the dial up a notch. While most of the power-ups in Joshua are again equivalent in function to those in Exodus, the most unique and impressive is Godspeed. Collecting this makes Joshua burn rubber around the mazes, and when combined with the mighty shovel that digs through rocks like sand at the beach, the Horn Tutor becomes a one-man wrecking machine of destruction. This goes to show that the NES featured some blast processing of its own. The most notable difference is in the addition of voice samples similar to Bible Buffet. Every time a stage is started, the voice says, and every time a stage is completed, it states, "Good job, Joshua." The voice samples are a nice touch, but they come at the expense of a soundtrack. While the music in Exodus was nothing to write home about, the lack of it in Joshua makes it feel like I'm playing the Atari 2600. Granted, there are some tunes, like the Godspeed Invincibility ditty, but the sound effects are the only noises heard during the majority of a playthrough. In another similarity to Exodus, Joshua also has 100 levels, and again, I didn't beat it. However, I should mention now that both titles have the option of skipping ahead 5 stages at a time on the start screen by pressing A, giving the option to go as high as level 81. I decided to fail with dignity, then beat it by cheating, but I did take a peek, out of curiosity, to see what 81 had to offer. Alrighty then. Pretty much what I expected. As it should be pretty obvious by now, Exodus and Joshua are simple maze games with some complicated puzzle elements thrown in, not too dissimilar from a gaming blast from my past, Boomer's Adventure in Asmic World. While they most certainly could be labeled as guilty of being unoriginal for being simple reskins, are they also guilty of being horrible in overall quality? To paraphrase Roland Orzabal, let's break it down again! Let's face it, Exodus and Joshua were designed with the sole purpose of cashing in on the profits to be made off of the Christian demographic which had yet to be represented in an 8-bit format. I mean, all they did was make a few tweaks to the story, sprites, and items from the superior crystal mines, and voila! Religious gold mine. On top of that, the challenge provided by this cart can be downright brutal at times, and I frequently found myself referring to a guide when I got stuck. For a supposedly Christian-friendly product, the presence of a suicide feature is really disconcerting. Couldn't they have just cut to black and gone back to the stage intro screen? It really goes against the religious morals that they are trying to espouse, and it further emphasizes that the Wisdom Tree brand was created only for the money. Last but not least, 100 levels. Come on now, how do they expect anybody to complete that and keep their sanity? If you value your sanity, play something less stressful and more family-friendly. Something like Kirby. He's cute, he's polite, and best of all, his games don't feature a suicide button. Let's condemn these sinners by participating in a peaceful Kirby-fueled protest. Aren't we being a little too melodramatic, Mr. Guilty? Exodus and Joshua aren't that bad. In fact, they're pretty fun puzzlers if you ask me. Sure, they may not be breaking any new ground, but what Wisdom Tree did accomplish with these reskins works fairly well. Admittedly, as the stages progressed, I got frustrated when I would get trapped and had to restart the level, or when a Bible question would be trapped and I had to lose a life because of it. In spite of this, no matter how frustrating it got, trying to beat it became like a mini addiction for me during my capture session. I didn't give up easily, and in fact I went over the amount of time I wanted to allot to it. One huge positive that these titles have over Bible Buffet is that they actually relate to the Bible. Now, I'm no biblical scholar, but I know that Exodus' journey to the Promised Land is based on the events of the book of Exodus from the Old Testament, which is part of the Bible. That alone should make them innocent of all charges. As for the suicide feature, I agree that it might be a little tasteless. However, this was a part of Crystal Mines, so naturally it would also find its way into these reskins. Exodus and Joshua are certainly not great games, but as far as simple, challenging, puzzle-esque titles, you could do far worse than playing them. Also, I will agree with the prosecutor that Kirby rocks. I don't know how anyone could hate that adorable little guy. In the dual trial of Exodus' journey to the Promised Land and Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, I ruled that the verdict is innocent. Don't get me wrong, neither of these are high-quality games, and I'm not going to recommend them as must-play, underrated gems, because they're not. It's just that none of the trademarks of bad games are really present here. The controls are tight, and the level design is respectable, especially since that task was performed by just 2 people. I really enjoyed the challenge that they provided, and not once did I feel that my playthrough would never end, unlike Bible Buffet. Long story short, Exodus and Joshua are decent, challenging puzzlers, so if you're a fan of that genre, there are certainly worse things that you can plunk your cash down on. So, until next week, when another Wisdom Tree title hits the stand, court is now adjourned. Thanks for watching, guys. Like I mentioned in the video, come back next week for another installment in my month-long Wisdom Tree Bible Games event. But until then, you can catch up on some old favorites, or if you're new to the channel, well, you got some new videos to watch. On the upper left-hand corner, because I mentioned it in the review, I figured I might as well link my Boomer's Adventure in Asmic World review. It's a pretty interesting game, certainly pretty obscure. Not too many people know about this game. Now, as far as the review itself, it's one of my early ones. It's a little more basic in comparison to what I do now, but it's still a pretty good video, so definitely give that a watch. On the upper right-hand corner, you got the first episode of the LJN Defender on Back to the Future. Now, for those who are wondering, the LJN Defender will be back in the new year. You can count on that. But it's just for the rest of this year. I wanted to put an emphasis on Innocent Until Proven Guilty, and now that I've done that, and I've done a lot of episodes of Innocent Until Proven Guilty, well, I think I'm going to put that on the back burner for the new year for at least a month or two. And do some, like, Cygnus videos and LJN Defender videos. So you can look forward to that then. Now, for those who haven't seen it, well, you can catch up now on LJN Defender while you're at it. You can just click that link right there, and that'll be the first episode, and you can just go from there in order if you want. Now, on the bottom left-hand corner, if you guys missed it last week, you can now catch up on the first installment of my Wisdom Tree Bible Games event on Bible Buffet. Now, what was my verdict on that? Well, you're just going to have to watch the video to find out. And as always, for anyone who's new to me and new to the channel, well, if you like what you see, just click that red button over there on the bottom right, and that'll subscribe you to my channel, and you'll see all of the videos I have coming up in the future. So as always, thanks again, guys, and I'll see you next week.